Two people can earn the same income, save the same amount of money, and start at the exact same financial point in life, and 20 years later, one of them can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the other. Not because they worked harder, not because they got lucky, because of one decision they made in their early 30s about where they were going to sleep at night. You've probably heard someone say renting is throwing money away. You've probably also heard someone say buying a home ties you down and drains you dry. Both of them think they're right. Both of them are missing the actual math. So which one is it? Let's meet Ryan and Steve. Same age, 32. Same job title, same salary. Same $80,000 sitting in savings. On paper, they are financially identical. Then Ryan does what most people are told is the responsible adult thing to do. He buys a home for $350,000. He puts his $80,000 toward the down payment and closing costs, gets a mortgage for the rest, and moves in feeling like he's finally made it. Steve does something different. He keeps renting a comparable place nearby. But here's the part people skip over when they judge him for it. Steve takes his $80,000 and invests it in a diversified stock index fund. And every single month, he takes the difference between what Ryan is paying in total housing costs and what he's paying in rent, and he invests that too. This is where the story actually gets interesting, because for the first few years, nothing dramatic happens. Ryan's mortgage payment feels like dead weight, most of it going to interest instead of the loan itself. Steve's portfolio moves up and down with the market, and some months it even loses value. Neither of them feels like a genius. Both of them, if you ask them, would probably tell you they're not sure they made the right call. That uncertainty is actually the whole point. Wealth-building decisions rarely feel obviously correct in year one. They reveal themselves over decades, not months. So let's fast forward. 20 years later, what does each life actually look like? Ryan's home, assuming a historically typical appreciation rate, has grown in value. Home prices in the U.S. have averaged somewhere in the range of 3 to 5% annual growth over long periods, according to housing data tracked by economist Robert Shiller, who co-created the Case-Shiller Home Price Index specifically because he wanted better data on how housing actually performs compared to how people assume it performs. Shiller's research is famous for one uncomfortable finding. Over the long run, housing has historically returned far less than the stock market once you strip out leverage and emotion from the comparison. Ryan's home might now be worth somewhere around $600,000. He's also paid down a meaningful chunk of his mortgage, so his equity, the part of the home he actually owns outright, has grown steadily too. On paper, Ryan looks wealthy. He owns a real physical asset. He can point to it. He can walk through it. Steve's story looks completely different and completely invisible from the outside. There's no house to point to. But his portfolio, invested consistently over 20 years in a low-cost index fund, has been compounding the entire time. The S&P 500 has historically returned close to 10% annually before inflation over long multi-decade stretches. That's not a guarantee for the future, and returns are never a straight line, but it's the kind of long-run data that led investor John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard and the man credited with popularizing the index fund, to argue that most people don't need to pick stocks or time the market to build serious wealth. They just need to consistently invest in the market as a whole and let time do the heavy lifting. Steve did exactly that with both his lump sum and his monthly contributions. Depending on actual market performance over those 2 decades, his portfolio could plausibly be worth more than Ryan's home equity, sometimes significantly more, especially because Steve's money was never locked into one single asset and it was compounding uninterrupted the whole time. So who won? Here's the uncomfortable truth neither side of this argument wants to admit. It depends. It genuinely depends on the numbers, the market conditions, the specific city, the mortgage rate, and something people almost never talk about, discipline. And this is where the story stops being about houses and starts being about psychology. Ryan didn't need extraordinary discipline to build wealth. His mortgage did it for him. Every single month, a portion of his payment automatically converted into equity whether he felt motivated or not. This is what behavioral economists call a forced savings mechanism, and it matters more than people realize. Richard Thaler, the Nobel Prize-winning economist known for his research into behavioral finance, has spent decades studying why humans are terrible at saving money consistently, even when they fully intend to. We're wired to prioritize the present over the future. We tell ourselves we'll invest the difference starting next month, and next month rarely comes. A mortgage removes that willpower requirement entirely. The bank doesn't care how you feel. The payment happens. Steve, on the other hand, needed something much rarer. He needed to take that monthly difference, month after month, year after year, through market downturns and through moments when a new car or a nicer vacation would have felt a lot more rewarding, and actually invest it instead of spending it. That's not a math problem. That's a psychology problem. And it's exactly why so many financial advisors who technically know that renting and investing can outperform buying still recommend buying to most people. Not because the math favors it, because most people won't actually execute the invest the difference strategy with the consistency it requires. The theoretical winner and the realistic winner are often two very different people. But even if you assume perfect discipline on Steve's side, buying and renting still aren't just a math equation. They're a risk equation. Ryan's wealth is concentrated in a single asset, in a single location. If that local housing market underperforms, if the neighborhood declines, if he needs to sell during a downturn because life forces his hand, his net worth takes the hit all at once. Steve's wealth, sitting in a diversified index fund, isn't tied to the fortunes of one house on one street. It's spread across hundreds of companies, industries, and even countries depending on the fund. There's also liquidity to consider. Steve can sell part of his portfolio in seconds if he needs cash for an emergency. Ryan can't sell one bedroom of his house. If he needs money, his options are limited to a loan against the home or selling the entire thing, along with the transaction costs, realtor fees, and taxes that come with it. And that brings up something almost nobody factors into these conversations correctly. The real cost of buying isn't just the mortgage. It's the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the repairs that show up uninvited, and the interest paid to the bank over the life of the loan. It's also the transaction costs on the way in and the way out, which can easily eat 5 to 10% of a home's value between the buying and selling process. Meanwhile, the real cost of renting isn't just the monthly check. It's the opportunity cost of not building equity, and the psychological cost of knowing you don't own anything tangible, even if your invisible portfolio is quietly outperforming your neighbor's mortgage. So how do you actually make this decision for yourself instead of just picking a side in an internet argument? Two numbers matter more than almost anything else. The first is the price-to-rent ratio in your specific area, which is simply the price of a comparable home divided by the annual rent for a similar property. When that ratio is low, buying tends to make more financial sense. When it's high, renting and investing the difference often wins, because you're effectively being asked to overpay for the privilege of ownership. The second number is your time horizon. Buying comes with high upfront transaction costs that only get diluted the longer you stay in the home. If you're likely to move within 3 to 5 years, those costs can quietly wipe out any equity gains. If you're planning to stay put for a decade or more, the math shifts meaningfully in favor of buying. This is the part of the story that Ryan and Steve's 20-year comparison is really trying to teach you. The question was never simply, should I rent or should I buy? That framing sends people chasing the wrong debate entirely. The real question is what happens to every single dollar under each choice, where it goes, how hard it works, and whether you personally have the discipline to make the losing on paper option actually win in practice. A mortgage can be one of the most effective wealth-building tools available to an ordinary person, not because real estate is magic, but because it forces consistency out of people who wouldn't otherwise have it. An index fund can be an even more powerful tool, not because the stock market is magic either, but because it rewards patience and diversification over decades. Neither path is automatically the smart one. Neither path is automatically the trap. Two people, same age, same income, same $80,000, 20 years later living completely different financial lives. Not because one of them found a secret the other one missed, but because they answered a much deeper question without even realizing they were answering it. What were they actually going to do with the money they weren't spending on rent or the money they weren't spending on a mortgage? That, and not the size of the down payment, is the real math behind the biggest financial decision most people will ever make.